Good afternoon and welcome to Matters Financial and Geopolitical from a Frontier. Thank you as always for stopping by. Let me start with some macro thoughts. This is the global foreign exchange rates, currencies against the dollar. Year-to-date change, that's via Reuters graphics. The Kenya shillings is fourth in that league table. I think they're missing the Ghana cedi, unless we've had a dramatic move in the last few days. And I'll come to the performance of the shilling, but you can see, I speak often about the China emerging markets frontier negative feedback loop, which was a positive feedback loop for 20 years. And you can see bottom of the list, the Real, badly hit, South African Rand also, and then of course the Asian currencies as well. Different stories, the gap between year-to-date performance of equities versus commodities has increased to almost 12%. Commodities have had the worst start to the year since the early 1990s. And that's perfectly logical when you consider that 25% of the global GDP growth emanates from China. And, notwithstanding the Chinese ability to play around with the numbers, it's come to a standstill. And it's difficult to see a meaningful rebound, in my view, anytime soon. The Baltic Dry Index, which is a very good proxy for global trade, is now down more than 83% from its 2019 peak. That's via JS Blokland. Home thoughts, Amboseli National Park, a super photograph from Speyer 669 via Kenya Pics. The scenery in the Amboseli is beautiful because you have the Mount Kilimanjaro in the background, and if you like elephants, that's surely the place to go to. Verses 620 to 623 of Sophocles' play Antigone. Evil appears as good in the minds of those whom God leads to destruction. And I think that remains powerful. I was listening to a lot of some of the evangelical preachers, and you really do wonder sometimes. This is the solar eclipse over the UAE via NASA Val Brigati. And that took me to G_S_Bogel, who is a very cryptic 21st century type philosopher. Narrative fallacy: when we see a sequence of facts, we interpret them as a story by threading them together into an imagined chain of cause and effect. If a drug addict commits suicide, we assume the drug habit led to the suicide, even if it didn't. Another form of apophenia is pareidolia. For eons, predators stalked us in the undergrowth and shadow. In such times, survival favored the paranoid, those who could discern a wolf from the vaguest of outlines. This paranoia preserved our species, but cursed us with pareidolia, so we now see wolves even in the skies. And of course, William Burroughs, the paranoid, knows something about what's going on. This is the sunrise in Hosaland via Tishiwo 16, a beautiful rustic scene. Sunrise at Kyoto House in Laikipia, photo by Donald Young via Kenya Pics. I like the flowers in the foreground. Political reflections: Turkey will find it hard to strike a balance between the two superpowers. It's a member of NATO and has some kind of arrangement with the Russians, and at the same time protect its jihadists in Syria. The time for Turkey to weigh up its options is near, says E.J. Malrai, and indeed the denouement seems to be coming closer. They seem to have infiltrated a lot of hardware, military hardware, into northern Syria. A Russian prankster glued a massive portrait of President Putin to the inside of a residential elevator. He then placed a camera in the elevator to record people's reactions. This is via Moscow Times and C.S. Dickey. It's very amusing. Before leaving Varanasi, I had the honor of visiting the sacred river Ganga, so said President Rajapaksa. I think that's the brother, in point of fact, not the current president. I commend Narendra Modi on his Namami Gange effort, not only because of the river's spiritual and cultural significance, but also because it is host to approximately 40% of India's population. Just in case you forgot, Sri Lanka is now governed by Gotabaya Rajapaksa, a man so sinister he used to keep a tank of sharks in his garden. That comes from Death of the Tiger in the New Yorker. The mobile phone video clip shows a pair of soldiers pushing a naked, blindfolded man into the frame. His hands are tied behind his back. One soldier, dressed in the uniform of the Sri Lankan army, forces him into a sitting position on the ground, kicks him in the back and steps out of the way as the other soldier comes forward and shoots him in the back of the head. The man's body jolts and flops down. Off camera, the shooter can be heard laughing giddily and exclaiming, "It's like he jumped." The soldiers kill 2 other men in similar fashion and then dispatch a number of wounded prisoners. The camera turns to show at least 8 other bodies, including those of several half-naked women lying in pools of blood. All of them appear to have been freshly executed. A master of battlefield innovation, Prabhakaran devised a form of execution for collaborators with the enemy. The victim was tied to a lamppost and blown to pieces with Cordex explosive fuse wire. Returning to Gotabaya, he didn't drink, he said, and didn't know what he had in the house. He knew only he had a bottle of Fonseca. "Would we like a drink of that?" he grinned. On the trolley was a bottle of Fonseca bin number 27, a brand of port. After dinner, Gotabaya led us outside, across his lawn. By the garden's high-security wall was a huge illuminated outdoor aquarium. Inside, several large, unmistakable shapes moved relentlessly back and forth. "Are those sharks?" I asked him. "Yes," he said. "Do you want to see them?" We crossed the lawn and stood in front of the tank, which was 8 feet tall and 20 feet wide. There were 4 sharks, each about 4 feet long, swimming among smaller fish. Delhi election results. This is a short video via Leon Lidugu. Arvind Kejriwal's AAM Admi party struck a hat-trick in Delhi. The party secured its return to power by winning 62 out of 70 seats. 2nd of December last year, I was writing about how the politics of ethnocratic nationalism are a bust. I was being a bit wishful, but this is evidence that I might have been right. Congratulations to the people of Delhi for refusing to be manipulated into hatred and divisiveness, for being the voice of a future of inclusiveness and modernity, of growth and progress, so said Kaushik C. Basu. Catastrophic fires released billions of tons of CO2 in 2019. Total carbon emissions from forest fires in 2019 weren't anomalously high compared with previous years' counts. They rose last year by 26% to 7.8 billion metric tons, the highest since 2002. Of course, on January 8, Copernicus declared 2019 the second hottest year on record, less than 1/10 of a degree Fahrenheit behind 2016. Such conditions are making the so-called fire weather, high temperatures, strong winds, low humidity likely to occur more often, scientists say. The predictions were already there. We already had studies showing if it becomes dry and hotter in places like the Arctic, at some point there'll be fires on a bigger scale than we've seen in a long time. Wildfires have released almost 8 gigatons of CO2 this year. And then I go back to G.S. Bogel's shifting baseline syndrome. Frog says to fish, "How's the water?" Fish replies, "What's water?" We become blind to what we're familiar with, and since the world is always changing and we're always getting used to it, we can even become blind to the slow march of catastrophe. 23rd of November 2015, I said, "I cannot help feeling we're like frogs in boiling water. We have created massive interference in the cosmic tuning phenomenon." 30th of September, I said the end is nigh, the feedback loop, and as it gets hotter, the feedback loop becomes more intense. The feedback loop and the risks of dieback, where we enter a phase of cascading system collapse. Okay, let's move on to COVID-19, which is the new terminology for the coronavirus. University of Toronto researchers have a model, and they're saying the epidemic started 1 month earlier than commonly believed in November 2019, and that was something I wrote and said when I was writing about it for the first time on the 27th of January. You can't get up to that level of cases if the epidemic started in December, even if you push the reproduction high. More morbid and macabre, I have seen several videos reporting flocks of crows in Wuhan and other areas of China that are being impacted by the virus, and this is further evidenced by that satellite imagery I showed you of sulfur over China. WHO Dr. Tedros says in the last few days he's seen concerning incidents of onward spread of virus in people with no history of travel to China, as in France, and that this could be the spark that becomes a bigger fire. He was so lackadaisical and slapdash, but he's changed his tune because the nature of a virus is it's so exponential, you can't play that game. You will be overwhelmed by the multiplicative nature of the virus, and he's obviously now understood that. Coronavirus could infect 60% of the global population if unchecked. The coronavirus epidemic could spread to about 2/3 of the world's population if it cannot be controlled, according to Hong Kong's leading public health epidemiologist. His warning came after the head of the World Health Organization said recent cases of coronavirus patients who had never visited China could be the tip of the iceberg. Professor Gabriel Leung, the chair of public health medicine at Hong Kong University, said the overriding question was to figure out the size and the shape of the iceberg. 60% of the world's population is an awfully big number, he told The Guardian. At the end of January, he warned in a paper in The Lancet that outbreaks were likely to be growing exponentially in cities in China, lagging just 1 to 2 weeks behind Wuhan. Epidemiologists and modelers were trying to figure out what was likely to happen, said Leung. Is 60 to 80% of the world's population going to get infected? Maybe not. Maybe this will come in waves. Maybe the virus is going to attenuate its lethality, because it certainly doesn't help if it kills everybody in its path, because it will get killed as well. That's the thought. This girl, who had locked herself at home for several days due to the virus epidemic, when she went downstairs and took out the trash, she also brought her sword. What a girl. That's from Global Times. Referencing G.S. Bogal, William S. Burroughs, a paranoid is someone who knows a little of what's going on. This is extraordinary. Maria Bartiroma interviewing Peter Navarro via Russian market. This was on Fox News. Have a listen to the first 30 seconds. Full front disinfection work has started in Wuhan, an effort to contain the spread of the coronavirus. That's from PD China. In his book City of Panic, Paul Virilio described the city reconstructed through the use of mediatized panic. With every natural disaster, health scare, now comes the inevitable information bomb. Live feeds take over real space, and technology connects life to the immediacy of terror, the ultimate expression of speed. But of course the Chinese are trying to make it a hermit kingdom in Wuhan. Chinese National Health Commission, Wuhan coronavirus confirmed case. Patients tested positive for the virus but have no symptoms will no longer be regarded as confirmed. This will inevitably lower the numbers. They're playing with those numbers big time. As I said on the 3rd of February, it's about the virus's escape velocity, and they exhibit non-linear and exponential characteristics. Chinese president, who'd been deep undercover, visited a Beijing neighborhood, making his first public appearance since the coronavirus outbreak. He appeared wearing a mask. This is via CCTV. He inspected a pneumonia prevention and control center in Beijing as well. GPF Futures, the geopolitics of the novel coronavirus. Geopolitics is a fairly slow-moving process that unfolds in predictable ways. This is usually the case. There are then moments when a wild card enters the system from the outside, unpredictable yet significant. At the moment, we can't tell if the new coronavirus is such an event. We don't know exactly how it is transmitted, how lethal it is, whether it causes long-term illness, and so on. We know it has broken out in a Chinese city, Wuhan, that the Chinese government regards it as serious enough to impose significant controls on movement in and out of Wuhan, and that a small number of cases in China relative to the population and a smaller number of cases outside of China have been reported. For this we depend on media reports, since our own knowledge of viral medicine is limited. Geopolitically, communicable diseases ranges from the common cold to the Black Death. The former is ever present but of little consequence. The latter massively disrupted European society and in some cases shifted the regional balance of power. The idea, he concludes, that the Central Committee was content with the financial situation, trade war, Hong Kong and Xinjiang is to me the least likely situation. Then I came across a very, very detailed and hard-hitting essay by an ex-Tsinghua University professor, Zhu Zhang-Run, translated in the China File, Viral Alarm, When Fury Overcomes Fear, an essay. Overnight, the country found itself in the grip of a devastating crisis. Fear was stalking the land. The authorities proved themselves to be at a loss, and the cost of their behavior was soon visited upon the common people. It was as though the China of the open door and reform policies for more than 3 decades was being destroyed in front of our eyes. The cause of all this lies with the Axelrod, that is Xi Jinping, and the cabal that surrounds him. They all blithely stood by as the crucial window of opportunity to deal with the outbreak of the infection snapped shut in their faces. That's the delay. Ours is a system in which the ultimate arbiter, an imperial era term used by state media to describe Xi Jinping, monopolizes power. It results in what I call organizational discombobulation. It is a system that turns every natural disaster into an even greater man-made catastrophe. The coronavirus epidemic has revealed the rotten core of Chinese governance, the fragile and vacuous heart of the jittering edifice of state has thereby shown up as never before. Only thieves nurtured at home can truly despoil a homeland. He made a big deal about personally this and personally that when meeting Tedros, Director General of the World Health Organization, on 29th January. Xi made a point of saying that he was personally commanding the response to the outbreak, a statement that was widely derided online, empty words that only serve to highlight the hypocrisy. Then he's got 9 segments. Politics in a new era of moral depletion. First and foremost, the political life of the nation is in a state of collapse, and the ethical core of the system has been rendered hollow, he says. The ultimate concern of China's polity today, and that of its highest leader, is to preserve at all costs the privileged position of the Communist Party and to maintain ruthlessly its hold on power. The broad masses of people are nothing more than a taxable unit, a value-bearing cipher in a metrics-based system of social management geared towards stability maintenance. We are funding the countless locusts, large and small, whose continued existence depends on a totalitarian system. What they have focused on in particular, however, is the tireless policing of the internet. They have unleashed the dogs and are paying these minions overtime to blockade the news. Information has been getting out regardless, proof that even while the government resorts to the tactics of a police state and the National Security Commission accrues ever greater powers to itself, it can never truly achieve its vaunted aims. The ancients observed that it's easier to dam a river than it is to silence the voice of the people. This time around, it is the virus that is proving the point once more, and in the most undeniable fashion. Otherwise, you will all be no better than fields of garlic chives, giving yourselves up to being harvested by the blade of power, time and again. The term garlic chives is often used as a metaphor to describe an endlessly renewable resource. Then number 2, tyranny in a new era of political license. Revival of the red culture. The people in the system who have now been promoted are in-house party hacks who slavishly obey orders. The system as a whole has fallen into desuetude. What remains is a widespread sense of hopelessness. It is an affliction whose symptoms I encapsulate in the expressions organizational discombobulation and systemic impotence. 3, a new era of attenuated governance. Collapse in consumer confidence, widespread panic about the long-term security of private property, administrative and academic frustration and pent-up anger, a general shutting down of society as a whole, and a depressed cultural and publishing industry. What is thriving, however, is all that is ridiculous red culture and the nauseating adulation that the system heaps on itself via shameless pro-party hacks who chirrup hosannas at every turn. Of particular and profound concern are the massive miscalculations that have been made, first regarding the uprising in Hong Kong. Repeated missteps in the special administrative zone have been followed by clumsy and haphazard moves that have led to the complete collapse of public confidence in political leadership. The upshot is a fundamental disaffection towards Beijing among the masses of a place that is, in reality, the most prosperous and civilized part of Chinese territory. The whole world has witnessed the ugly reality of the polity that lurks behind this situation. And at this very juncture, the Axelrod, befuddled as usual, is for his pains, also having to deal with an America led by a man who repeatedly trumps him by virtue of his own unpredictability. Here the author alters the Chinese transliteration of Trump's name to read extremely befuddling. That is someone who stumps everyone. The power holders have in recent years accelerated their attempts to stifle all signs that China might be developing a civil society. Censorship increases by the day. In response to the virus, for instance, at first the authorities shut down public disquiet and outspoken commentary via censorship. They then simply shut down entire cities. First people's hearts die, and then death stalks the living. One could go so far to say that from the highest echelon to the very bottom of the system, this lot represents the worst political team to have run China since 1978. He then makes 5 key demands: lift the ban on independent media and publishing, put an end to the secret police surveillance of the internet, allow citizens to enjoy their right to demonstrate, freedom of assembly and association, respect basic universal rights of our citizens, and fifthly, matter of pressing urgency, that an independent body be established to investigate the origins of the epidemic. 4, a new era of resuscitated court politics. You have the equivalent of a court and the politics pertaining to one. Put in the most obvious way, the collective leadership with its 9 dragons ruling the waters. Xi's leadership saw this number reduced to 7, and its concomitant claque of rulers is no longer operable. And with its relative decline in efficacy, the one leader's inner circle becomes a state within a state, something that the Yankees have taken to calling the deep state. In the last few years, a new kind of hermetically sealed governance has come to the fore, and due to the hidden nature of court politics, it is one that has enabled a sole power holder while giving license to the darkest kinds of plotting and scheming. It is a rulership structure that stifles change and forecloses the kinds of changes that could support regularized forms of governance. System is under constant strain. It is virtually impossible for anyone to act in any meaningful fashion. Instead, all are forced to look on in impotent frustration as the situation deteriorates. This may well go on until things are simply beyond salvaging. The present chaos in Wuhan has thrown Hubei into confusion, but as we have noted before, the root cause of the expanding problem is in Beijing. A new era of big data totalitarianism and WeChat terror. 5. They now turn to rule over the people by means of what could be dubbed big data totalitarianism and WeChat terror. Communists are ever more obsessed with control over their rivers and mountains, in particular by means of big data totalitarianism. Large as possible because of unlimited government budgets, we're now experiencing a 1984 style of total surveillance and control. The masses, through their taxes, are in fact funding a vast internet police force that is empowered by the party state to oversee, supervise, track every statement and action made by everyone in the country. This new canker on the body politic is a direct product of the system itself. People now live in constant anxiety, for they know that the imposition of this kind of internet terrorism is not limited merely to the suspension or shutting down of personal WeChat accounts, or the larger enterprise of banning whole chat groups, which are a vital way for individuals to debate issues of interest. Everyone is mindful that the online terror can all too readily escape the virtual realm and become overtly physical. That is the cases when the authorities use what they have learned online to send the police to deal with online users in real time. A constant self-censorship, and people are beset by nagging worries about what inexplicable punishment may befall them at any given moment. An evolving military tyranny that is underpinned by an ideology cobbled together from strains of traditional harsh Chinese legalist thought, wedded to an admix of the Leninist-Stalinist interpretation of Marxism, along with the Germano-Aryan form of fascism. It is a system that has systematically outlawed society in the civil realm, all cut off all other sources of information apart from its own, and given licenses only to its own propaganda apparatus. The nation such as this may well attempt to strut, but it is little more than a crippled giant, that is, if it can even be called a giant. 6. A new era that has shut down reform. The people suffer whether the state prospers or fails. One can only hope that in the wake of the coronavirus, the people of China will rethink their situation and that this ancient land will awaken to its predicament. Might it perhaps be possible to initiate a fourth wave of reform? A new era of isolation, a polity that is blatantly incapable of treating its own people properly, can hardly be expected to treat the rest of the world well. Such places will only be able to find their assumed pulchritude reflected back at them in the mirror of their imperial self-regard. 8. A new era in which to seek freedom from fear. The people are no longer fearful. That's always the tipping point. Kapuscinski writes about that. Now, as a result of this great virus, the people are enraged and they've had enough. Even before now, they have repeatedly paid a heavy price. That levy demanded to support the grandiose displays of celebration and self-congratulation that the party state uses to advertise prosperity and peace. All the while, they are treated as straw dogs, that is, sacrificial victims to be dispensed with at will. They witness the ever-increasing death toll, yet they're being shut down on WeChat and forced into silence, while the power holders extol their own heroism and shamelessly heap plaudits on themselves. Mass sentiment can be summed up in the line made famous in Bei Dao's 1976 poem, "I do not believe," and they won't put up with it anymore. When humanity is tested to the very point of extinction, know that this may presage the true end of his days. A new era in which the clock is ticking. Just as such a pipe dream seemed to capture people's imaginations, developments in Hong Kong and Taiwan showed the periphery can suddenly throw the center off kilter. Very true. Events in those places have been so dramatic, in fact, that they may even offer a ray of hope, for it's perhaps, only perhaps, that with such a path forward, one in which the periphery gradually influences the center and makes imaginable some kind of peaceful transition, that a particular Chinese way out of our present political conundrum may be found. Perhaps, too, the besieged city of Wuhan, beset as it is by crisis, may also prove to be a Jerusalem. A place of hope and peace, an old city proffering new hope. To put it another way, a breakthrough originating from the periphery may augur once more as it did in the 1890s, the 1910s, the 1940s, and again in the 1980s. We the people, survive no better than swine, fewer upon the power holders like curs, and live in filth like maggots. As I write these words, I reflect on my own situation, which was also dramatically changed in 2018 when the author published his famous anti-Xi Jeremiad. For having raised my voice then, I was punished for speech crimes. Thereafter, I was suspended from my job as a university lecturer, cashiered as a professor, reduced to a minor academic rank. I was placed under investigation by my employer. Confronted by this great virus, as all of us are right now, I feel, though a vast chasm has opened up before us, I feel compelled to speak out again. What a powerful critique. 3rd of February, I spoke about the escape velocity of the virus, its non-linearity and exponential characteristics, and that's why I also referenced Groucho Marx, who are you going to believe, me or your own eyes, which is what he's talking about. Xi Jinping and his algorithmic control was another article I wrote, and that's what he's complaining about, and the fact that he's up on a pedestal, and the political brand will not permit a retreat, let alone a surrender. And on the 7th of October, on the occasion of China at 70, I concluded in my final paragraph by saying this: I would venture that Xi's high watermark is behind him. And, I said, the world in the 21st century exhibits viral. I never predicted that such a virus would arrive. Wildfire and exponential characteristics and feedback loops which only become obvious in hindsight. I quoted, "Vanity of vanities, says the preacher, vanity of vanities, all is vanity. There is no remembrance of former things, nor will there be any remembrance of later things, yet to be among those who come after." C.S. Dickey, this really is a black swan moment, possibly. Smash the control images, smash the control machine. William S. Burroughs, a virus does exactly that. A non-linear and exponential virus represents the greatest risk to a control machine in point of fact. This is Hang Xiang, free speech. Hong Kong is showing symptoms of a failed state. Grocery runs in Asia's financial powerhouse have begun to remind me of shopping in Russia. In the chaotic summer of 1998, you grab what you can, and if there is a queue, you consider joining it. A fragile state is usually defined by its inability to protect citizens, to provide basic services, and by questions over the legitimacy of its government. A $360 billion economy torn apart by months of anti-government protests is in tatters. The problem isn't the epidemic or indeed Hong Kong's health system, rather it's the mishandling of the situation by the administration of Carrie Lam, left with so little legitimacy and social capital that citizens simply no longer believe it will act in their interest. This isn't Caracas, at least not yet, says the article. 21st of October, I was talking about the crusher of bones, Xi Jinping and his algorithmic control. The Chinese dream, I said, has become a nightmare at the boundaries of the Han Empire. And I also said in a previous article, I'm sure Xi sees Hong Kong and Taiwan like a virus and is looking to impose a quarantine, just like he has imposed on Xinjiang. I wonder what's happening there. Let's move on to the markets, but that was a very tremendous tour de force. Let's have a look at the currency markets. 109.04 euro dollar, very weak. Dollar index 98.796. Japanese yen 109.86. Swiss franc 0.9755. The pound 129.54. The Australian dollar 0.6727. The Kiwi had a big bounce. I'll get to that in a moment. India rupee 71.212. South Korean won 11.7858. The Rial, that's been the worst performing currency in 2020, 4.3313. Egyptian pound 15.72, top four currency. South African rand 14.78, sell it on rebounds. Dollar index, bullish of course, flight to quality. Euro at its weakest in 4 months, close to setting a 30-month low. This chart was slightly out of date, but we're now at 109.03. New Zealand dollar rose 1% to 64.62. Where are we right now? Just around there. Kiwi surged after New Zealand Central Bank gave forecasts showing no chance of a cut this year. Crude oil getting its little bounce going, 50.88. But it's been in this range of about 51.50 to 49.60. And I expect us to stay there with potential for a downside break. Gold, buy it on dips, 1564.75 last. Dollar real, this is from D-Tap Cap. Tweeted this pic last year of incredible cup and handle pattern that would eventually move lower, taking the real lower and the higher dollar. Extremely rare 20-year long chart. Suggests large dollar move coming. And that took me to Jair Bolsonaro. Have a look at the 7-second clip of him, as I wrote about him at Unga, when he said, "You shall know the truth, and the truth shall set you free." Trails of death and destruction, ideologically infected human souls, and biologically perverted children, which I will just leave out there because his intervention, in fact, left me speechless. Moving on, Sub-Saharan Africa, Sudan's government, this is a big geopolitical development, agreed to hand over Omar al-Bashir to the ICC. That's a huge development, but puts that fellow Hemedti in a spot of bother. 29th of July, I spoke of the Oud Spring in Khartoum. 10th of June, I was saying the zeitgeist of the revolution in Khartoum was intoxicating as I watched events unfold. It felt like Sudan was a portal into a whole new normal. In that same article, I was quoting Hugh Masekela, "I want to be there when the people start to turn it around," and I said Sudan is a Masekela pivot moment. German state-owned development bank KfW reported to have signed a $1.5 billion credit line with Angola. They need it. Benin plans to sell more than $550 million in bonds. $10 billion economy, which sold a debut offshore bond of 500 million euros in March, will probably sell a bigger amount of debt. It's really incredible how the Eurobond markets have opened up to these higher yielding, previously off the map countries. At a wedding in Mali, met zero MSM yesterday. I traveled up the river Niger and stopped at a village. That's Steph Simanowitz. When looking at the map, there is not a single red dot in Africa, but that could change quickly. The marketeer, as I said on the 27th of January, have to assume that coronavirus is already in Africa, but just not diagnosed. That's a racing certainty. It's a little bit like Indonesia. It would indeed be ironic if it were the very leaders that have failed to act who become unwitting vectors as they leave the AU summit in Addis with the literal coronavirus airport hub and spread it across Africa. Considering the size of Chinese population in Africa and a large number of people who continue to go back and forth, it's either incredible luck or poor screening that explains why there's still not a confirmed case on the continent. Eric Alanda, we're definitely not prepared. Africa braces for the new virus. This is Lusaka, Zambia. At a Chinese-run hospital in Zambia, some employees watched as people who recently returned from China showed up with coughs but were not placed in isolation. A doctor tending to those patients has stopped coming to work, and health workers have been ordered not to speak publicly about the new virus that has killed hundreds around the world. The problem is, even if it's mild, it can paralyze the whole community, said Dr. Michael Yao. We're definitely not prepared. If we had a couple of cases, it would spread very quickly. Physiotherapists, we're doing the best we can with the resources we have. On Wednesday, the hospital set up a new fever clinic where people arrived with a high temperature are now taken to right away. It's unfortunate the ward wasn't set up earlier. Crucially, no one in Zambia has been able to test for the virus so far. Like most African countries, has been waiting for a substance known as a reagent, which labs require to confirm whether a patient is infected. Labs in just 6 of Africa's 54 countries were equipped as of midweek. Zambia's health ministry spokesman, Dr. Abel Kabalo, called the employee accounts of events at the hospital very strange. He vowed that if Zambia confirms a case, authorities will definitely inform the world. Ethiopian Airlines, however, faces questions by some in Africa about why it continues to operate more than 30 China flights a week, while other African airlines have suspended theirs. Concerns are high among some in Kitwe. Local pharmacy manager Edward Goma estimated that his business has sold more than 800 face masks in the past few days. Bole Airport in Addis is the epicenter of the China-Africa connectedness. Fly Ethiopian, this is the Chinese embassy in Addis, is playing a positive role in coronavirus control, moving assistance. In hindsight, it won't look clever to have dragged 55 African heads of state, European President Trudeau, Guterres, Norwegian PM and their gigantic delegations to Addis. We're talking about thousands of centrally placed persons in all their home countries, now lots of patient zeros. I said it should be interesting. Coronavirus fallout is battering African economies, Capital Economics says. In Angola, Sonangol has been forced to resell at a discount at least one shipment, which was already en route according to Capital Economics. Indirect economic fallout from the virus outbreak is hitting Africa with the sharp fall in commodity prices battering economies across the continent. Base metals heavily relied upon by the African export market, such as iron ore, copper, have also seen sharp depreciations in recent weeks. In terms of economic exposure, Republic of Congo, 70% of GDP depends on exports to China. Angola relies on China as well. Zambia, DR Congo, Nigeria, and Ghana. I called it the China EM frontier feedback loop phenomenon. The phenomenon was positive for the last 2 decades, but has now undergone a trend reversal. The Rand is the purest proxy for this phenomenon. And if you're interested, this is the Congo President Sassou Nguesso arriving for a national event. It's the most extraordinary thing you could watch. Large parts of Africa are now facing exponential jihadism, irreversible climate migration, water tables gone kaput, imminent coronavirus, swarms of locusts, that's Mostak. Baby desert locusts in Somalia will become East Africa's next plague wave. UN agronomy experts have warned climate change-driven rain has triggered unprecedented breeding. FAO warned Sunday that nymph baby desert locusts maturing in Somalia's rebel-held backcountry, where aerial spraying is next to unrealizable, will develop wings in the next 3 or 4 weeks and threaten millions of people already short of food. Once in flight in Hungary, the swarm could be the most devastating plague of locusts in any of our living memories if we don't reduce the problem faster than we're doing at the moment. Locusts were now very hungry teenagers, but once mature, their progeny would hatch, generating a 20-fold increase in numbers, warned Keith Cressman. Let's finish up in Kenya. I wrote recently where we're under plague of locusts and Al-Shabaab attack. Exodus 10. If you refuse to let them go, I will bring locusts into your country tomorrow. They will cover the face of the ground that it cannot be seen. They will devour what little you have left after the hail, including every tree that is growing in your fields. They will fill your houses and those of all your officials and all the Egyptians, something neither your parents nor your ancestors have ever seen from the day they settled in this land till now. Luke 21:11. There will be great earthquakes and in various places famines and pestilences, and there will be terrors and great signs from heaven. Revelation, when he opened the sixth seal, I looked, and behold, there was a great earthquake, and the sun became black as sackcloth, the full moon became like blood, and the stars of the sky fell to the earth as the fig tree sheds its winter fruit when shaken by a gale. It certainly feels like a decade of semiotic arousal when everything it seemed was a sign, a harbinger of some future radical disjuncture or cataclysmic upheaval. Zambian Kwacha reaches parity with the Rand after steep drop, as I said on the 14th of October in an article called Ozymandias, the canary in the coal mine in Zambia. Zimbabwe's Labour ministers recently published the minimum wage for domestic workers. The minimum wage for a gardener is approximately $8.90 per month. As I said, admittedly, a year ago, Zimbabwe is a tipping point moment. The choice of that moment is the greatest riddle of history. Yuval Harari, money is accordingly a system of mutual trust, and not just any system of mutual trust. Money is the most universal and most efficient system of mutual trust ever devised. South African all-share minus 0.18%, dollar rand 14.7852, Egyptian pound 15.72. They're getting into a deal with the IMF, I think. EGX 30 up 0.34%. Buhari told Trudeau, we're eager to expand trade because you're one of the biggest customers of Nigeria's crude oil. He's asked the National Assembly to approve a $3.3 billion sale of Eurobonds this financial year. Nigeria all share up 3.84% year to date. Ghana Stock Exchange down 2.24% year to date. The Total chief, Mr. Pouyanne, has dismissed Tullow oil takeover idea. Their share price has slumped to a 19-year low in December. As of late 2019, Tullow has been saddled with $2.8 billion in debt, a hangover from the last oil price crash. Amid industry speculation about a potential Tullow takeover target, Pouyanne told Reuters, when asked whether Total might buy Tullow, stop dreaming, no. Of course, this is impactful for Kenya because Tullow has this resource in northern Kenya and in Uganda. I said the shilling is surfing higher on a trifecta of positive developments to the star. Remittances, running at $2.4 billion a year, have beefed up the country's FX position. I'd also attributed the strong shilling to the 17% drop in oil prices. There is an obvious inverse correlation between the price of oil and the value of the shilling. And finally, I said a benign Eurobond environment allows Kenya to issue in the near term and kick the can down the road a bit. This is Raila Odinga and his wife Ida paying their last respects to President Moi. Nairobi all shares plus 0.78%, NSE 20 is down 2.28% year to date. Thank you for listening.